Hello, everyone. My name is Oge Onabogu, and I'm the director of the Africa program at the Wilson Center. This week, a lot of conversations around AGOA, the U.S. African Growth and Opportunities Act. Many of us who follow AGOA, we know that this is a cornerstone of U.S. economic engagement with Africa. AGOA was enacted by Congress in 2000 and renewed in 2015. AGOA is set to expire in 2025. This week, the 20th AGOA Forum is taking place in Johannesburg, South Africa, and we are delighted that Witney Schneidman, who is a member of the Africa Center Advisory Council and also a former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs, is attending the forum in South Africa. And we're delighted that he's joining us this week to give us his views and impressions on some of the discussions that are happening. Since the launch of AGOA, the Wilson Center has followed AGOA's progress through published numerous articles and events that we've held over time to examine AGOA's role in U.S.-Africa relations and Africa's economy. We've also put together a webpage that we're calling the Road to Reauthorization, that basically puts together a collection of all these documents and resources for easy access. So really delighted to have Witney joining us for this conversation today, live from Johannesburg, South Africa. Witney, welcome.
Thank you, Ogie. It's great to be here and pleased to be doing this with you. Absolutely.
Thank you so much. So Witney, why don't you give us some background on AGOA? What is AGOA?
So AGOA was a game changer for the relationship between the United States and Africa. You know, the discussions started in the Clinton administration. It's actually started in Congress. At the end of the Cold War, the thinking was we need a new policy for Africa. Until then, U.S. policy had been predicated on aid largely, and aid is about a donor-recipient relationship. And many of us saw dynamic things happening on the continent. Elections were happening, economic growth was breaking out, investment opportunities were emerging. So we wanted to craft a new policy that would embrace all of those dynamics. And we came up with the African Growth and Opportunity Act. And what AGOA does is that it lowers to zero the tariffs on some 6,400 products coming from Africa into the United States to give them duty-free access. Now, that's a very important part. And the shift was to use aid as a stimulus for economic development, as opposed to singularly relying on aid. But conditionalities were put into it. It was a unilateral preference program, but for countries to get into the AGOA program, they had to be making progress on economic reform, political pluralization, respect for rule of law and human rights. So these conditionalities have been at the core of AGOA as well. But here we are 25 years later, and AGOA has had some successes. There's no question about it. Some countries have really benefited from AGOA. Today, you can walk into sort of popular clothing stores like Gap or Land's End, and you'll see a rack of shirts or pants that say "Made in Mexico." Well, right next to them, you might see another rack of pants or shirts that say "Made in Eswatini or Lesotho." And the idea was to change the narrative about Africa and to get more U.S. investment. So where we are, we're at this inflection point. As you said, Ogie, it's up for renewal in 2025. It will expire in 2025. So there's an active debate going on. One, should we extend it? Two, if we do, what kind of changes do we need to make to the legislation? Number three, how do we make it more impactful for Africa, for folks on the continent, people to earn jobs, companies to grow their capabilities? And how does the United States benefit from it more? And I think finally there's an appreciation that based on the U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit, based on the launch of the Biden administration's Diaspora Advisory Council, we're in new territory. We have a new opportunity here. And what role does AGOA play in this and seizing this new opportunity. So this is sort of the backdrop to the AGOA Forum that's taking place this week in Johannesburg. It'll be attended by all the trade ministers. Catherine Tai, the U.S. Trade Representative, is leading the U.S. delegation. One of the main, most significant new developments. This is the first time that there will be an AGOA ministerial where there's an African Continental Free Trade Agreement in the midst of this. And Wamkeli Mene, the Secretary General of the AFCFTAs, is a vital part of these conversations. So as you can see, it's a very vibrant and fertile environment for really thinking through how do we deepen the U.S.-African relationship, how do we deepen the U.S.-African commercial relationship.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. So as you pointed out, the forum starts this week, but I know you've had some time to at least attend some pre-events that have happened. Are you able to share some of your impressions or thoughts from some of those pre-discussions?
Yes. So this afternoon, I went to an event that was co-chaired by the Corporate Council on Africa and the African Free Trade Secretariat that was hosted by Standard Bank. And there were really two different sessions. One was on the issue of unlocking trade and investment opportunities in pharmaceuticals. And the second session was really about a broader discussion. How do we promote U.S. trade and investment? And I think a couple of the takeaways is that, by themselves, African countries largely don't have the scale to attract the kind of U.S. investment. When you look at the issue of pharmaceuticals, Wamkeli Mene, Secretary General, shared this one story. He was at this big conference sitting next to a CEO of a giant U.S. pharmaceutical company. And when he got up, he challenged the CEO to build a vaccine plant in Africa. When the CEO got up, he challenged Wamkeli to have a unified regulatory environment. So all 54 countries could have, approved, there'd be one approval for these medicines to move around the continent. So it's these kinds of issues that are being discussed. I mean, very real issues. And I think will benefit everybody's thinking when it comes to implementation of the AFCFTA and modernization of AGOA.
Mm-hmm. Can you say a little bit about the the African Continental Free Trade Area? You've mentioned it. Can you say a little bit about it?
Yes, this is an idea that's been a long time coming. This is references have been made back to President Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana, who really, in 1957 talked about the need to have one unified African market, to have one unified currency across the continent. And the AFCFTA was born about 3 years ago by an act of the African Union when all heads of state sort of said, we're going to do this. And we're going to create one integrated market, which would actually be the largest free trade market in the world and have the potential of about $3.4 trillion of GDP. So a secretariat was created in Accra, Ghana. It's now, some 250 people. They have a number of protocols. The AFCFTA is working, for instance, on a digital protocol that would help the whole digital sector move data across borders easily. And I think the idea is, the intra-Africa trade today is at about 15%, the lowest of any region. In Asia, East Asia, it's about 50 or 60%. Same with the European Union. So the idea is to create this regional market and to create the intra-regional trade to get it up to about 30% by 2030, 2035. And then I guess the last point is to have the AFCFTA be the precursor to an African common market, where the economies are really integrated along a range of issues. So it's a very ambitious undertaking. The time is right, and I think the U.S. is in a good position to be a strong partner to the AFCFTA.
Thank you so much. So that's actually a really good segue to our last question here. What to expect this week? What are your expectations from the conversations that will happen at the forum this week?
Well, it's a good question. I think U.S.-African relations are actually in a pretty good place. Um, Last year's U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit was very successful and created a lot of energy, and I think an understanding on both sides that the U.S. wants to be a genuine partner to Africa, but we have to listen and learn. We have to listen to each other and learn from each other. And so I'm hopeful that what takes place over the next 3 days is a lot of listening and learning, and that we come out of this even more energized in the trade and investment space to really deepen commercial ties, to figure out how African countries can take better use of AGOA. I think there's a fair argument to be made that some countries have really utilized it very well. A lot of countries haven't. There's a lot of room for improvement. And I think, so that's one thing that I would like to see. And another is to get more US companies around the table and for them to see Africa as a continent of opportunity and move away from sort of the common view that Africa is all risk and no opportunity. I'd like to reverse that paradigm so they can really understand the opportunity, the fact that, there are 1.2 billion people on the continent, the median age is 19, and how to figure out how to engage with that for a long-term relationship with the people in this market, and how that can be beneficial across many sectors.
Well, thank you so much, Witney. We will be watching the conversations and listening to the conversations this week. Looking forward to catching back up with you again later on this week as we hear your thoughts from some of the other conversations that you'll have the opportunity to participate in. So thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us. And for those who are viewing, we also want to remind you that we have a collection of materials on the Wilson Center website as we've been tracking AGOA since its launch. So please check out those sources on our webpage. And Witney, thank you so much for joining us, and look forward to catching back up with you again later on this week.
Thank you.